Welcome to Deepu Cater Stories. What is the price of a single assumption? For one wealthy suburban community, the cost was their most prized possession, a beautiful private lake. It all started on a peaceful morning, with a man, a boat, and a promise he intended to keep. But when the president of the HOA, a woman named Carol Finch, decided he looked out of place, she made a phone call, a call to 911. That call set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted. A story of quiet racism, shocking consequences, and the ultimate act of justice. In this story, we will explore how one man's quiet stand against prejudice completely dismantled a powerful homeowners association and its exclusive fishing club. This is a story you think you know, but I promise you, the truth is far more powerful. Let's begin. The echo of a final word. The screen showed dozens of faces, silent squares on a cold digital grid. The residents of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, waiting. Some faces were clear, illuminated by the cold blue light of their monitors. Others were just dark shapes against a bright window. A few were nothing more than a name typed in white letters on a black background. Anonymite. The digital silence was heavy, thick with things unsaid. You could almost feel the tension radiating through the pixels, a low hum of anxiety from house to house. Then, a voice cut through it. It was not a voice of anger or of sadness. It was the voice of a lawyer, a man named Davies. His voice was polished and hard, like granite from a quarry, with no room for doubt. On behalf of my client, Samuel Jones, the voice stated, clear and without emotion. The access agreement for Serenity Lake is terminated. A pause, so brief, but it stretched for an eternity in the world of video calls. You could see a flicker in someone's eyes, a slight intake of breath from another, the way a man's hand came up to rub his tired face. This termination is effective immediately. Another pause. This one deeper, more final. It was the sound of a door being locked, a heavy, iron door. The decision is final. The faces on the screen remained frozen, some in shock, some in disbelief, but one face seemed to understand. Dr. Lena Petrova, a historian, new to the neighborhood. She saw more than just angry neighbors. She saw a story as old as the land itself. A story of boundaries drawn and boundaries broken. A pattern she had studied in books, now playing out in tiny squares on her laptop screen. The quiet language of power and consequence. Final, the words settled over the group, a tombstone on a conversation. But this story did not begin there. In the cold, artificial glow of a computer, it did not start with a vote, or an argument, or a line drawn in the sand. It began 3 days earlier, under a vast and forgiving morning sky, with the gentle lap of water against an old aluminum boat. 3 days earlier. The air was cool and clean. It smelled of damp earth, of decaying leaves, of the clean scent of pine. Samuel Jones stood by the shore of Serenity Lake. At 60 years old, his movements were deliberate, unhurried. He was a retired architect, a man who had spent his life with blueprints and deadlines, with the noise of construction and the hard lines of concrete. This quiet was his reward, a life's work, distilled into a single, peaceful morning. His old thermos held black coffee, no sugar. The steam rose from the cup, a small, fleeting ghost disappearing into the morning mist that hovered over the water. His fishing boat, its aluminum hull polished but marked by years of use, rocked gently in the shallow water. It had carried him through calm mornings and sudden storms. It was not a fancy boat. It had no powerful engine. It was a vessel for memories. This lake was more than water and land. It was a promise made to another ghost. A ghost named Elijah, his grandfather, Deca de Sago. Elijah had been the gardener on this very land. Samuel could still picture him, a tall, lean man with hands that looked like they were carved from old wood. Those hands had tended the oaks and the willows that now shaded the expensive homes of Willow Creek. He had watched the sun rise over this lake every morning for 40 years. He knew the names of the birds that nested in the reeds. He knew where the big bass liked to hide when the summer sun was high. But he had never once been allowed to cast a line into its waters. It was private property then, just as it was now. A luxury he could see, but never touch. A world apart, separated by a line no one could see, but everyone could feel. Samuel remembered his grandfather's words, spoken not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unshakable clarity. They had been sitting on the porch of their small house, miles from here. After a long day's work, Elijah had been staring off into the distance. "That silence out there? Son," he had said, his voice low like the rustle of leaves. "It holds more truth than any human words." So Samuel had bought the lake, and the land around it. He had used his life's savings. The process had taken months. Lawyers, deeds, surveys, a mountain of paper to purchase a piece of quiet. It was not an investment, it was an act of remembrance, an act of quiet justice that only he and the ghost of Elijah would ever truly understand. He took a slow sip of his coffee. The warmth spread through his chest. He was not just here to fish. He was here to listen, to honor that silence his grandfather had so deeply respected. He looked across the glassy surface of the water. He breathed it all in. The quiet, the memory, the peace. It felt solid, real. It was the foundation of his new life. He did not know it then. A sound was coming. It started as a faint hum, a thin, electric whine that did not belong with the song of the crickets or the call of the distant loon. It was a sound that tore a small hole in the fabric of the morning. It was the sound of rules, of regulations. The hum grew louder. It became the crunch of gravel under rubber tires. Harsh, insistent. He did not know that this sound was the end of the quiet. And the beginning of the end? A silence worth protecting. The approaching sound was an intrusion, a violation of the morning's pact of peace. It was the sound of the world Samuel had intentionally left behind. The world of schedules, of demands, of other people's priorities. Samuel tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the ritual, a small act of defiance against the encroaching noise. From a small, dark wooden tackle box, a box that had belonged to his grandfather. Its brass hinges green with age, he retrieved a heavy, folded document. It was thick paper, important paper, bearing the embossed, intricate seal of the county clerk. The deed, he unfolded it carefully. The creases worn like the lines on an old, well-loved map. Each fold a memory of the day he had signed it. He didn't need to read the words. He knew them by heart, had recited them to himself in the quiet of the night during the long months of legal proceedings. All that certain lot, piece or parcel of land, with the buildings and improvements thereon erected, situate, lying, and being. It was poetry to him, the poetry of ownership, the poetry of a promise finally kept. He placed the deed on the empty passenger seat of his small boat. A silent testament, a placeholder for the man who should have been sitting there, the man whose spirit inhabited every ripple on the water. Elijah. His grandfather would have loved this morning. He had loved every morning, even the ones that started before dawn, the ones spent on his knees in someone else's garden, pulling weeds from soil he would never own. Samuel remembered being a small boy, trailing behind Elijah as he worked, the scent of fresh-cut grass and damp earth clinging to the old man's worn denim clothes. Elijah moved with the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons, a silent conversation with the earth. He knew the secrets of the soil, the quiet language of the flowers, and he knew the lake. It was the centerpiece of the grand estate, a sparkling, living jewel he was hired to polish, but never to wear. He was the keeper of its beauty, but a stranger to its embrace. He would often stop his work, leaning on his rake, and point a long, dirt-stained finger toward the water. His eyes distant. "See that spot over there? Sammy?" he would whisper, his voice a low, confidential rumble, so as not to disturb the residents of the main house, where the sunlight hits the water just so. Past that old willow that dips its branches in, that's where the old catfish sleeps. He would describe the fish in the lake as if they were old friends he was forbidden to visit. He spoke of their habits, their size, their legendary cunning. He knew them intimately, from a distance, through a lifetime of quiet, patient observation. He was a fisherman without a rod, a sailor without a boat, forever moored to the shore. Once, Samuel, full of a child's simple, devastating logic, had asked, "Grandpa, if you know where all the fish are, why don't we just go fishing?" Elijah had stopped, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips. He had looked not at Samuel, but out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the lake, a world away. "This water ain't for us, son," was all he had said. He hadn't explained the rules, the invisible lines, the complex world of ownership and privilege that kept him tethered to the shore. He didn't have to. The truth was, in his eyes, in the slight slump of his shoulders, the lake was a beautiful picture behind a pane of thick, unbreakable glass, something to be admired, but never, ever entered. That memory had stayed with Samuel, a small, hard kernel of purpose that grew over the years. It became the foundation upon which he built his life. He had worked hard. He had studied until his eyes burned. He had designed buildings that touched the sky, structures of steel and glass that reshaped city skylines. He had made a world for himself that his grandfather could never have imagined, but none of it felt as real, as solid, as important, as this small piece of land, this circle he was finally, painstakingly, closing for both of them. He picked up his fishing rod. It was an old rod, Elijah's rod, the one he had used to fish in public streams and muddy, nameless rivers, the one he had always dreamed of casting into the clear, deep, forbidden waters of Serenity Lake. Holding it felt like holding his grandfather's hand. The silence that Elijah had craved, the peace that Samuel had paid for with a lifetime of relentless work, was finally here. It was a sacred, fragile thing, a silence worth protecting at all costs. The crunch of gravel grew louder, harsher, closer. En arrogant sound, the silence that Elijah had dreamed of, and that Samuel had finally secured, was about to be torn apart by the sound of a golf cart, coming to a stop just a few feet away. The clipboard and the accusation. The golf cart stopped. The whine of its electric motor died, leaving a new kind of silence, one that felt heavy, unnatural, and expectant. A woman stepped out, planting her feet on the ground with a sense of deliberate ownership, as if the very gravel beneath her shoes belonged to her. She was in her 60s, her blonde hair perfectly styled in a helmet of resistance to the morning breeze. Her clothes a crisp ensemble of pastel colors that seemed designed for a country club luncheon, not a lakeside morning. In her hand, she held a clipboard. She held it not like a piece of office equipment, but like a scepter, a shield, a weapon. This was Eleanor Vance, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. She did not say hello. She did not offer a neighborly nod. She walked directly towards Samuel, her expensive walking shoes crunching on the gravel path with an unnerving rhythm. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a quick, dismissive inventory: his old boat, his worn jeans, his thermos of coffee, and finally, him, It was the look of someone cataloging things that were out of place, things that disturbed the perfect order of her world. "This area is for members of the Willow Creek Fishing Club only," she announced, forgoing any preamble. Her voice was sharp, polished by years of leading committee meetings and winning small suburban battles, the kind of voice used to giving orders and expecting them to be followed without question. "You'll need to move your boat immediately." Samuel took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to hold on to the morning's peace. A small, flickering candle against a rising wind. He kept his voice level, calm. "Good morning to you. 2. I believe there might be a misunderstanding." There is no misunderstanding," Eleanor snapped, tapping a silver pen against her clipboard. The sound was a small, angry woodpecker drilling into the quiet. "I have the list of permitted members right here. Your name is not on it. The rules of this community are very clear, and they apply to everyone, without exception." Rules. The word hung in the air. A cold, hard thing. Samuel had designed buildings that had to adhere to thousands of pages of codes and regulations. He understood rules, but he also understood their purpose. And their spirit. What he heard in her voice was something different. The worship of rules for their own sake. "I don't believe I need to be on a list," Samuel said, his voice still quiet, but firm. Eleanor's smile was thin. A brief, dismissive slash of lipstick. It did not reach her eyes. "Oh, everyone needs to be on the list. That's how a community functions. By following the rules. Otherwise, we have chaos. People just showing up, thinking they can do whatever they please, leaving their trash, making noise." She looked pointedly at his boat again, as if it were a piece of litter itself. A deep weariness began to settle in Samuel's bones. It was a familiar feeling, a ghost from 1,000 other moments in his life. In stores, in restaurants, in meetings. This quiet assumption, this immediate categorization, his own silence seemed to make her even angrier, as if it were a form of insolence. "Are you going to move? Or not?" she demanded, taking a step closer. "Because I am perfectly prepared to handle this officially." She pulled out her phone. Her fingers tapped on the screen with a practiced, aggressive speed. She held it up as if it were a badge of office, a symbol of her authority. He looked at her, at the absolute prostate, unshakable certainty on her face, the complete lack of curiosity. She had not asked who he was. She had already decided. He saw then that this was not about a list. It was not about rules. It was about control. It was about her world, and who she allowed to be in it. It was about protecting a boundary she had drawn in her own mind. He turned away from her and looked out at the water, at the silence she was methodically destroying. "I have lived in this community for 30 years, she said, her voice rising. Each word, a carefully placed stone in the wall she was building between them. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't. Since you refuse to cooperate, I have no choice but to call the police and report a suspicious trespasser." The morning was broken. The peace was gone. All that remained was the ugly sound of an accusation and the cold, hard feel of a phone in a woman's hand, ready to dial 3 numbers that could change everything. Eleanor's actions pushed the story to a point of no return. Have you ever witnessed a situation where a small misunderstanding escalated into a major crisis? Share your story in the comments below. And now, let's see what happens when that 911 call is made. The weight of a badge. The silence that followed Eleanor's threat was different. It was not peaceful. It was tense, charged, filled with the low, electric hum of what was about to happen. Samuel did not move. He did not argue. He simply stood by his boat, a statue of patience, waiting for the inevitable next act in this tiresome play. The sound of a distant siren began as a faint cry in the perfect blue sky. A needle-thin sound that grew steadily, painfully louder until a police car turned down the gravel road. Its lights were flashing silently, pulsing red and blue against the green trees. A garish, unwelcome intrusion on the natural world. A heartbeat of institutional power. 2 officers got out. One was young, his uniform sharp, his expression a mask of professional seriousness. Officer Kent. He had the look of a man who followed procedures to the letter. The other was older, a man with tired eyes and a slight slump to his shoulders, who moved with a slow, deliberate pace that spoke of long years on the job. Officer Miller. He looked like a man who had seen this same small, sad scene play out 1,000 times before in 1,000 different backyards. Eleanor immediately approached them. The clipboard now pressed to her chest like a piece of vital evidence in a major case. She spoke in a rush. Her voice, a carefully modulated mixture of civic authority and personal alarm. She pointed at Samuel. She used words like uncooperative and refused to leave. She painted a picture of a reasonable request from a community leader being met with stubborn, inexplicable défiance. She was the protector of order. He was the agent of chaos. She was careful not to mention his race. But the word suspicious did all the heavy lifting for her. Officer Miller listened patiently. You do not belong here. The unspoken question hanging in the air. What are you doing here, ma'am? He began, trying one last time to bridge the gap with reason. This lake is private property? She cut him off, her voice sharp with impatience. Maintained by the HOA for the exclusive use of our residents and their approved guests. I am the president of that HOA. And you, sire, are trespassing. Trespassing. Another word. A heavy, loaded word. A legal word. A weaponized word. Could I see some identification? Please? Samuel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. A cold knot he had learned to live with. He knew this ritual. The slow, deliberate reach for the wallet. Hands always in plain sight. A pantomime of harmlessness. The careful, non-threatening movements learned over a lifetime of such encounters. He was intensely aware of eyes watching from the windows of the expensive houses that bordered the lake. He was on display. A curiosity. A problem to be solved. He handed his driver's license to the officer. Officer Miller took it and walked back to his patrol car. The car door opened and closed with a solid, official thud. Officer Kent stood nearby, his hand resting almost casually near his sidearm. It was not a threat. It was simply a presence, a silent reminder of the power dynamic at play in this quiet, lakeside theater. The minutes stretched on, thick and slow. The only sounds were the cawing of a distant crow and the low, indecipherable crackle of the police radio. A voice from another world speaking a language of codes and incidents. Eleanor stood with her arms crossed, a smug, expectant look settling on her face. She had followed the rules. She had escalated the situation. She had called the authorities. She was certain of the outcome. Justice, in her mind, was about to be served. Finally, the patrol car door opened again. Officer Miller walked back. He handed the license back to Samuel with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then, he turned to Eleanor. His expression had not changed, but his voice had. The professional neutrality was gone, replaced by something else. Weariness. Ma'am, he began, his voice still level, but now with a new edge of finality. According to the county records, this gentleman, Mr. Samuel Jones, is the sole owner of this entire parcel of land. That includes the lake itself. Eleanor stared at him. Her smooth expression faltered, then dissolved completely, like sugar in rain. What? That's impossible. The HOA has managed this lake for. The HOA has an access agreement. Ma'am. Officer Miller continued, his patience clearly wearing thin. An agreement which allows your club to use the lake? subject to the owner's terms. But Mr. Jones owns it. So, if anyone is trespassing here today, it isn't him. The world seemed to stop. The color drained from Eleanor's face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The young officer, Kent, looked down at his shoes. Suddenly very interested in the pattern of the gravel, a curtain twitched in a nearby window. The audience was retreating. Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment. Her authority, her certainty, her entire, carefully constructed world of rules and lists and belonging, had crumbled to dust at her feet in a matter of seconds. The clipboard slipped from her numb fingers. It fell to the ground with a soft, unsatisfying thud, scattering papers in the gentle morning breeze like fallen leaves. She had not just dropped a stack of papers, she had dropped the illusion of her power. But for Samuel, this quiet, public victory brought no sweetness. It only left the bitter taste of a truth he already knew. A truth that had just been proven, once again. The decision in the quiet. Samuel drove home. He didn't remember the drive itself, the turns of the road, the familiar landmarks. His mind was a quiet, gray fog of the immediate past. The flashing lights, the strained silence, Eleanor's face, a mask of disbelief. He parked the car in the garage, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a long time, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the cooling metal. The silence in the car was heavy, oppressive. It was nothing like the peaceful, life-affirming silence of the morning. That silence had been full of promise, of life, of connection to his grandfather. This one was an absence, a void, a space where peace used to be. He finally went inside. The house was cool and dark, a refuge from the too bright sun. He walked past the kitchen, past the living room with its carefully chosen furniture and family photos, and went straight to his study. It was a room at the back of the house, his sanctuary, with a large picture window that looked out over the lake. His lake. He sat down in his worn leather armchair, the one he always sat in to think, its cushions molded to his shape over years of contemplation. He stared out at the water. The sun was higher now. The mist burned away completely. The lake shimmered, a dazzling sheet of silver and blue, beautiful and profoundly indifferent. But to Samuel, it looked different. The surface seemed tainted, the memory of the flashing police lights permanently reflected in its depths. The confrontation had left a stain, an invisible film of ugliness that spoiled the view. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel vindicated. He just felt tired. A deep, soul-level exhaustion that had been decades in the making. An accumulation of 1,000 small cuts and a few deep wounds. This morning had been one of the deep ones. He knew this wasn't about one woman. It wasn't about Eleanor Vance and her clipboard and her imagined authority. She was just a symptom. A loud, abrasive symptom of a deeper, quieter illness. It was the casual assumption of authority, the reflexive dismissal of his presence, the immediate escalation from a simple question to a threat involving the police. A threat that carried a much heavier weight for a man who looked like him. It was a pattern, woven into the very fabric of his life. A pattern he had hoped to leave behind when he retired to this quiet place. An apology from her would mean nothing. It would be a bandage on a wound that went down to the bone. It would be a temporary truce in a war he was tired of fighting on a daily basis. He thought of Elijah. He could almost feel his grandfather standing beside him, smelling of soil and quiet dignity. He got up and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up a framed photograph. It was black and white, faded at the edges. A picture of Elijah, standing tall and proud next to a prize-winning rosebush he had cultivated for his employers. His expression was serene. But Samuel, looking at it now with older eyes, we saw something else there too. A quiet resignation. the stoicism of a man who had learned to endure, to swallow injustices like bitter medicine, to keep his peace by keeping his silence. His grandfather's silence had been a shield, a form of survival, a necessary tool in a world that gave him few others. But Samuel lived in a different world, a world he had helped build. He had bought this land. He held the deed in his own name. His silence could not be the same. To continue on as if nothing had happened, to allow the fishing club to return tomorrow with their coolers and their chatter, to nod politely at Eleanor Vance at the grocery store, that would not be peace. It would be surrender. It would be a betrayal of the very reason he had come here. A betrayal of the ghost sitting in the boat beside him that morning. He remembered another thing his grandfather used to say, a phrase spoken on a hot afternoon after a foreman had spoken to him with casual, biting disrespect. Elijah had looked at his own calloused hands, then at Samuel, who had been watching with wide, angry eyes. Dignity, he had said, his voice soft but firm, is the one thing no one can ever take from you, son, unless you give it to them. And Samuel finally, completely, understood, continuing to grant access to the lake, as if his dignity had not been assaulted on its very shore, would be handing it over freely. It would be saying that what had happened was acceptable, that it was just a misunderstanding. And it was not. It was a fundamental violation of the peace he had purchased, of the legacy he was trying to honor. The exhaustion began to recede, washed away by a tide of cold, clear resolve. It was not anger. It was clarity. The kind of clarity an architect feels when he sees the final, perfect, uncompromising line of a design. He knew what the structure of the future had to be. He stood up and walked over to his desk. He picked up the phone. His hand was steady. His mind was clear. He dialed the number for his lawyer. Mr. Davies. When the lawyer answered, Samuel's voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. It was the voice he used when making a final, inchangeable décision on a building site. A decision that would set concrete and steel in motion. Mr. Davies, he said, looking out at the shimmering Papakane. Beautiful. Violated lake. I need you to draft a notice. There will be no negotiation clause. I want it terminated. Permanently, and just like that, in the quiet of a late afternoon, the echo of a final decision was made. The digital wildfire. The email from the law office of Davies and Finch arrived in the inboxes of the Willow Creek Estates residents at 5:47 p.m. The subject line was stark. Officiel. Unemotional. Regarding Lake Serenity access agreement, most opened it out of simple curiosity, expecting another dry update about landscaping or seasonal fees. The Homeowners Association. A constant stream of mundane notices. What they found inside, however, was a short, brutally clear legal notice. It cited the expired terms of the original agreement and the recent incident of harassment against the property owner. It concluded with a single, unambiguous sentence that landed like a dropped stone in a quiet pond, effective immediately. All access to the lake and its surrounding property by members of the HOA is permanently revoked. Permanently. The word was absolute. No appeal. No discussion. For a few minutes, there was a stunned, digital silence. You could almost imagine the collective intake of breath across the neighborhood as people read and reread the message. Then, the wildfire began. The first spark was on the private neighborhood Facebook group, Willow Creek Neighbors. The post was from Eleanor Vance. It was long, emotional, and masterfully crafted to paint herself as the victim and the community's champion. She described herself as a dedicated, unpaid volunteer, simply trying to enforce the community's long-standing rules for the good of all residents. She portrayed Samuel as an aggressive, uncooperative stranger who had met her reasonable, polite questions with irrational hostility. She conveniently omitted the part about calling the police. Instead, she framed the revocation of lake access as a disproportionate, vindictive retaliation for a simple misunderstanding she had tried to handle with grace. Then came the gasoline she poured on the spark. "I'm also hearing troubling rumors," she wrote, her words dripping with manufactured concern, "that this new owner may be a property developer. Perhaps this was his plan all along, to create a conflict, revoke access, and then sell our beautiful lake to be turned into high-density condominiums. We must stand together against this threat to our community values and our property values." The effect was instantaneous. Chaos. The comment section exploded into a frenzy of fear and outrage. "I've lived here 20 years. That lake is part of our home," one wrote. His profile picture, a smiling man holding a large fish. Another added, "This is what happens when you let outsiders in without proper vetting." The rumor about the property developer took hold like a virus, mutating with each new comment. "My realtor told me this could happen. Our home values will plummet. This is a disaster." Dr. Lena Petrova watched the fire spread from the cool quiet of her study. As a historian, she wasn't surprised. She recognized the patterns immediately. The creation of an outside threat, the appeal to financial fear, the distortion of facts to fit a narrative of grievance. It was a playbook as old as time, now playing out in real time with emojis and angry face reactions. She scrolled through the comments. A grim catalog of suburban fear and entitlement. People who had never met Samuel Jones were now experts on his character, his motives, his supposed plans to destroy their way of life. His silence in the face of the online mob was taken as proof of guilt. "Why won't he come on here and explain himself if he has nothing to hide?" a user demanded. "He could have just talked to us like a civilized person," another lamented, completely oblivious to the irony that it was Eleanor who had refused to talk. Choosing instead to escalate, Eleanor fanned the flames, replying to sympathetic comments with expressions of shared concern and helplessness. She was no longer the aggressor who had called the police on a man on his own property. She was the brave defender of Willow Creek, standing shoulder to shoulder with her neighbors against the mysterious, silent man who had stolen their lake. Lena read one last comment, a particularly vicious one speculating on Samuel's background and questioning what kind of person would act this way. She felt a familiar sickness in the pit of her stomach. This was how it always started. A small lie, a seed of fear, an us versus them narrative that absolved the us of all responsibility. She closed her laptop. The glow of the screen vanished, but the ugliness of the words remained, hanging in the quiet air of her room. She knew that silence in the face of a lie was a form of agreement, and as a historian, she knew better than anyone that history is written by those who have the courage to speak up. The uncomfortable truth. Lena let the digital storm rage for another hour. She watched the factions form, the accusations fly, the fear calcify into a hard, collective anger that demanded action. It was a mob mentality, stripped of reason and fueled by Eleanor's self-serving narrative. Then, with the calm deliberation of a scholar preparing a thesis for peer review, she began to write. She did not post on the main Facebook thread. That was a wildfire she could not quench with logic. It was an emotional inferno. Instead, she started a new post on the official HOA online forum, a less chaotic space, under the simple, neutral title, "A Question of Facts Regarding the Lake Access Issue." Her post was not emotional. It contained no accusations, no anger. It was a model of detached, intellectual clarity, designed to appeal not to passion, but to reason. "My fellow neighbors," she began, her tone respectful and measured, "I have been reading the recent discussions on various platforms with great concern. There is a great deal of emotion and speculation circulating, which is understandable given the situation. Perhaps it would be helpful, however, to pause and consider only the verifiable facts of the situation as we understand them." She then laid them out in a simple, Numbered list. Each point a cold, hard stone of fact dropped into the churning waters of rumor. 1. A new resident, who is also the legal property owner of the lake, was approached on his own land. 2. His right to be there was questioned by a representative of the HOA. 3. When a disagreement occurred, the police were called to the scene by the HOA representative. 4. The police, after investigating, confirmed the man's legal ownership of the property in question. 5. Following this incident, the property owner, through his legal counsel, revoked an access agreement that the HOA had apparently allowed to expire. She let the facts sit there for a moment before continuing, allowing the weight of their sequence to sink in. These appear to be the undisputed events. It seems to me the questions we should be asking are not about hypothetical development plans or the character of a man we do not know. The real questions are about our own actions as a community and as an association. Is it our community's policy to call the police on a resident who is on their own property? Is a shared privilege, like using the lake for recreation, more important than the dignity and safety of a fellow neighbor? She did not use the word race. She did not have to. She trusted her neighbors to read between the lines, to feel the uncomfortable weight of the truth she had laid bare. She ended the post simply, "I believe how we answer these questions will define the true character of our community far more than any property values. Sincerely, Dr. Lena Petrova." The post did not extinguish the fire, but it did create a firebreak. It gave a voice and a logical foundation to the silent, uneasy minority. The initial responses were defensive, dismissive, attempts to poke holes in her logic. But then, a few quiet voices began to emerge. An elderly man named Mr. Miller, who lived in the house closest to the confrontation and had seen the whole thing from his porch, posted a short, simple comment that carried immense weight. "I was there. I saw it happen. Dr. Petrova's summary of the facts is accurate. That was all. But it was enough." A few people sent Lena private messages. "Thank you for saying that. I was afraid to speak up against Eleanor." Another wrote, "You're right. This has gone too far this time." The solid wall of outrage began to show cracks. The narrative was no longer simple. The pressure in the community shifted, becoming a low, insistent hum of discomfort and internal division. The chaos of the Facebook group was now countered by the quiet, undeniable logic on the official forum. The HOA board, sensing a loss of control and facing a potential internal revolt, had no choice. An email was sent out. Its tone urgent. An emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association would be held via video call in 2 days. To address the escalating crisis, Lena's actions lit a small candle in the darkness. But whether it was enough to illuminate the truth, we don't yet know. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting the number 1 below. So, I know I still have friends accompanying me on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to continue with the final part. That fateful meeting is approaching, and it will change Willow Creek forever. The empty chair. The emergency meeting of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association began exactly at 7 p.m. Lena Petrova watched from her study as the silent squares of the video call grid populated one by one. Dozens of faces, all drawn with the same tight lines of anxiety and anger. The digital space felt charged. A silent courtroom where everyone was both a juror and a defendant. Samuel Jones's square was empty. A black box with his name typed in white, an empty chair at the table. Eleanor Vance appeared on screen. Her background a perfectly arranged bookshelf. She looked composed. But Lena, a historian trained to notice the small details, could see the tremor in her hand as she adjusted her glasses. Her confidence had been cracked. She started the meeting by trying to control the narrative, speaking of unfortunate events and the need for the community to come together to face this outside challenge. She spoke of property values and shared amenities. She spoke of everything except the core of the issue. She did not mention the police. But the firebreak Lena had built had done its work. The quiet minority was no longer silent. Eleanor. A voice cut in. It was Mr. Miller. The elderly neighbor? His face was grim. You're not telling the whole story. You called the police on that man. I saw it. We need to talk about that. Oh. Suddenly, others found their voice. A woman Lena didn't know asked, "Is it true the access agreement had expired? Why weren't we told?" Another man demanded to know why Eleanor had felt it was appropriate to escalate the situation so dramatically. The questions came one after another. Not an angry mob, but a quiet, firm chorus of accountability. Eleanor faltered. She tried to deflect, to speak again of rules and procedures. But the words sounded hollow. Her power was built on the foundation of assumed community consensus, and that foundation was visibly crumbling. The carefully constructed image of the benevolent protector was being chipped away, revealing the petty tyrant beneath. As the argument reached a fever pitch, a new participant entered the call. A new square appeared on the grid. It was the lawyer, Mr. Davies. His background was a simple, neutral wall. He was an emissary from another world, the world of consequences. "Good evening," he said, his calm voice immediately silencing the chaotic crosstalk. "I am here on behalf of my client, Samuel Jones. He has chosen not to attend, but he asked that I reiterate his position, so there is no confusion." And then, just as we heard at the very beginning of our story, the lawyer read the statement. "The access agreement for Serenity Lake is terminated." A pause. "This termination is effective immediately." A deeper pause. "The decision is final." The words landed with the cold, hard finality of a judge's gavel. This was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. The chaotic energy of the meeting evaporated, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. They had been arguing about how to fix the problem, assuming it could be fixed. They had just been told, in the clearest possible terms, that it could not. Into that silence, Mr. Miller spoke again, his voice quiet but resolute. "In light of the catastrophic consequences of our president's actions, and her clear misrepresentation of the facts to this community, I would like to make a motion. I move for a vote of no confidence in Eleanor Vance as president of this homeowners association." A motion. A procedure. A rule. Eleanor's own weapons were being turned against her. Another board member, a woman who had been silent until now, quickly seconded the motion. According to the bylaws, it had to be voted on immediately. The vote was conducted via the poll feature. A small, anonymous box appeared on the screen. "Do you have confidence in the current president?" "Yes." "No." Lena watched the faces. Some clicked immediately. Others hesitated. A few turned off their cameras. Unable to perform the execution in public, Lena clicked no without hesitation. The results appeared a moment later. A stark bar graph. An overwhelming majority had voted no. Eleanor Vance stared at the screen. The color drained from her face. She did not say a word. She did not argue. She simply moved her mouse. And her square on the grid vanished. She was gone. The meeting ended in a flurry of confused comments and awkward silence. They had removed the person who caused the problem, but they could not get back what they had lost. Serenity Lake was now quieter than ever, surrounded by an invisible fence of regret. The legacy of a fisherman. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Autumn painted the leaves around Serenity Lake in brilliant shades of red and gold. Colors few of the residents of Willow Creek now saw. A physical fence had been erected. A simple but clear black chain-link barrier. It followed the property line precisely. Attached to the gate was a new sign, professionally printed. It read, "Private property. No trespassing." The lake had become a picture behind glass once more. A silent, beautiful reminder of what had been lost through arrogance and fear. The Willow Creek Fishing Club was permanently disbanded. The community forums were quiet. the argument having long since exhausted itself into a sullen peace. But the story did not end there. With a fence and a sign, Samuel Jones had spent the first few months in quiet contemplation. The anger had faded, leaving behind a clear, calm space. He had secured his peace. He had honored his grandfather's dignity, but he found that the silence, now absolute and undisputed, felt empty. His grandfather had never just wanted silence for himself. He had wanted to share the simple joy of fishing, a joy he had passed on to Samuel. One afternoon, sitting in his study, an idea began to form, an idea that felt right, that felt like the final, missing piece of the structure he was building. It was not a legacy of exclusion, but of inclusion, just a different kind. He made a call, not to a lawyer, but to the director of a youth center in the inner city, a place he had supported with quiet donations for years. He explained his idea. He described the lake, the fish, the quiet. He spoke of his grandfather. The director was speechless for a moment, then overwhelmed with gratitude. And so, the Elijah Jones Memorial Fishing Program was born. Now, every other Saturday morning, a small yellow bus makes its way down the quiet suburban streets of Willow Creek. It stops at the new gate, where Samuel is waiting to unlock it. Out pour a dozen children, their voices bright with excitement, their eyes wide with a wonder many of the residents had long ago lost. They are children from neighborhoods with more concrete than grass, more sirens than birdsong. For most of them, it is the first time they have ever seen a lake so clean, or held a real fishing rod. The final scene is not one of silence, but of joyous sound. Samuel is standing on the shore, patiently showing a small girl with bright, curious eyes how to bait her own hook. He is no longer just an architect or a property owner. He is a teacher, a mentor, a keeper of a legacy. The sound of children's laughter now echoes across the water, a sound more beautiful than the quietest silence. A young boy, having just caught his first tiny sunfish, runs up to him, his face a perfect picture of pride. "Mr. Jones," he asks, breathless, "do you own this whole big lake?" Samuel looks down at the boy, and then out at the water, and a genuine, peaceful smile touches his lips. "No," he says softly, "I'm just the caretaker." He looks up at the sky, feeling the warm sun on his face. His grandfather had dreamed of the silence of a solitary fisherman, but Samuel Jones had discovered a deeper truth. The most beautiful silence is the one you share with those who have never known it. True legacy was not in what you owned, but in the dignity you passed on. And there, on the shores of Serenity Lake, a new and better legacy had finally begun. And so, the story of the lake comes to a close. It reminds us that true community isn't built on rules written on a clipboard, but on simple, human dignity. It shows how a single assumption can carry a permanent cost, while a true act of generosity can build a better world in its place. I would be genuinely interested to read your own reflections on this in the comments. If these kinds of stories resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe and join our community here at Deepu Kader Stories. Thank you for listening, and for being a companion on this journey.